Come on, you're supposed to be. Oh, you are recording. Okay. It's gonna be sounding fun because I don't know how to edit that video. It's going up as is. Thank you all for coming to my show today. Everybody hearing me okay out of the speaker over here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
For those of you who may not know my name yet, I'm Torvald Torgarson, and we're going to take a little trip back in time to the age of the Vikings. However, you're not actually going to hear me use that phrase, the Vikings, because the Viking is not something you are. Viking is actually something you do. Viking is a verb. There's a lot of argument over exactly what it means. I happen to prefer the explanation that it means I go trading and or raiding. Okay, it was interchangeable. Now there were Norsemen that essentially did nothing but raid and were not much more than pirates. There were Norsemen that essentially were not much more than traders all the time. But given the right set of circumstances at any given moment, one or the other would do both. Okay? And I'll give you an example of that. Let's say that I'm a trader, I'm coming through your local area, and you know something, Grim? I really like those shoes of yours. I tell you what, I've got some fur, I've got some amber, I'll trade you for those shoes. And you say, no, they're not for sale. Okay, fine, you don't want to trade. How about instead I buy those boots from you? I've got white salt, I've got silver, heck, I've even got gold. I'll just buy them outright. And you say, no, they're not for sale. Okay? Now you're being unreasonable. Because there is nothing so valuable and so precious that you shouldn't be at least willing to entertain the idea of a sale or a trade. You may put a price on them that I'm not willing to pay, but you shouldn't just be saying no. So now I got to ask myself two questions. Question number one, am I strong enough to take it away from you? If the answer to that question is yes, okay, now I got to ask myself the second question. Is this a regular stop on my trade route, and do I come through here fairly often going either direction? And if the answer to that question is yes, and therefore I need to maintain the goodwill of the local people, okay, fine, keep your boots. If the answer to that question, on the other hand, is no, I'm not coming back through this way again, I'm just passing through and I'm never coming by, you know, at some point today, you're going to be by yourself, and them boots are coming with me when I leave. So, as I mentioned, Viking is something you do, it's not something you are. And so throughout the stories, you're going to hear me referring to it as, I'm going Viking, I'm coming back from Viking, I've been Viking. And so I needed to give you just a little bit of an explanation as to how that works. Okay. So for the first story, we're going to move right into here, and this is the original story that started the whole mess, so once you get to hear it, you're going to know why it continued on. So the name of this story is Halfdan's New Longboat. You know, it's been quite a while since I've been back to my old home village of Skogner, so I decided to go back, hook up with my good buddy Sven, get to spun all the doings. And as we headed up into town there, I noticed there was a new longhouse up on the edge of town. So I go, hey Sven, you know, what's with the new longhouse there? Did somebody new move into town? He says, nah, that's just a new berserker longhouse, see? And we keep all the berserkers up in there now. Whatever it takes to keep them happy, we send it to them. If they want beer, we send them beer. If they want food, we send them food. If they want women, yeah, we send them more beer. And as we get up there, I go up and I look at the door, and you know, they got the doors closed, and there's a bar across the outside, and right up above it is this little sign that says, in case of war, break bar. And I notice there's a whole lot of noise coming from inside there, so I move over and I look in through the window, and he goes, what's all the noise? And he says, oh, they're just having an axe-catching contest. Okay, you mean they're having an axe throwing contest? No, they're having an axe catching contest. Ooh, ow, oh boy, that is going to leave a mark. Harold just missed. Ooh, that is not a pretty sight. So we go on ahead and head down into town after that, and we see a whole lot of people hanging out down by the pier. So we want to go see what they're all looking at down there. Halfdan got himself a new longboat. And he is so happy with this new longboat, although he's a little sketchy on the details of how he got it. Something along the lines of, the old owner don't need it no more. Yeah, sure, you betcha. And I do have to admit, it's a pretty nice longboat, you know. There's maybe a little fire damage on the end there, a few axe blows on the side, but other than that, it's in really good shape. But I also noticed there's about 30 oars to a side on that there longboat, you know, and that's more able-bodied men than we got in the whole village to row it. Although nobody was going to say anything to Halfdan about that. He may not be a berserker, but he ain't all that far off, neither. So anyway, you know, like I say, he's really happy about this new longboat of his, and he decides he wants to go oar dancing. Now, as I mentioned, that's more men than we got to man the oars there, so we piled the whole village into the boat. All except the berserkers, we kept them up there in their longhouse. We piled the whole village into the boat, and we're all hanging onto the oars just the one side there, and in some places we got 2 and 3 kiddies to an oar, hoping they can kind of just hold it down. Well, anyway, he goes and he jumps out of the back of the boat, he lands on the oars, he runs up the side of the boat, he jumps in the front of the boat, we all let go of the oars on the one side, we run to the other side, we're trying to get the oars out before it jumps off the front of the boat, and we don't make it. And he lands right down there in the water. And he ain't too happy about taking no ice water bath, I can tell you that. About that time, we decided it was a good idea to go back up into town because nobody wanted to be there when Halfdan came up out of the water. As I mentioned, he may not be a berserker, but he ain't all that far off, neither. Well, that's the story from the village of Scott here, and I'll let you know the next time I go back for a visit. Yeah, sure, you betcha. Now we have a little bit of fun. I'm going to give a little bit of education now behind some of that, because not all of that was as fanciful as it sounds. How many people here actually believe that the Berserker Longhouse was something that the Norse did? No hands at all? Boy, I got you all on that one, because believe it or not, it's relatively true.
Oh, wow.
One of the things about the Berserkers, now how many people know what Berserkers are? Okay, all right. Okay, so the thing was, though, Berserkers were kind of like the tactical nuclear weapon of the Viking Age, okay? They were the ultimate fire and forget weapon. You point them in a direction, you say kill, and you just stay out of the way. Wait to see how many of them come wandering back when everything's over, okay? But the problem is, of course, that back in the Viking Age, since you had to have these guys around, you never knew when you were going to need them. So you had to have a place to keep them. And since most of the time they were pretty much loud, obnoxious, and violent, which everybody thought the Vikings were, so that gives you kind of an idea here how bad they were. If you think I'm smelly, obnoxious, and violent, and I think he's smelly, obnoxious, and violent, that's pretty bad. So basically, if you were a Herser or a Jarl, one of the lords of the Vikings, you needed to have a way to keep these guys around, but you didn't want them just wandering loose, because if they got bored, damage was going to ensue. Property damage, livestock damage, personal damage, it didn't matter. If they got bored, something got broke. Okay? So you would set aside a section of your compound that was just for them, and you literally did whatever you could to keep them in there. So you would give them food, drink, water, more drink, water, food, women occasionally, livestock if they wanted, and then again, more beer. Or mead, okay, because of course that was one of the preferred drinks of the Norse. Or dancing. How many folks believe that that was something that they did? Yeah, we got a lot more hands with that one, because we do actually see that in the sagas fairly often. Now, one of the things you got to watch out for when you're reading the sagas is taking what's said at face value, okay? If it's said more than once in different sources, that's a pretty good indication it was something they actually did. If you only see it once in one location or one saga, chances are somebody's just bragging, okay? Which was actually a very noteworthy skill among the Norse. Matter of fact, we have Bragi Badason the Old, who was the father of skaldic verse, but then again, the Norse god of poetry is called Bragi. And it is where we do get the word bragging from, okay? All right, so we've had a little bit of an education. Let's get back to having some more fun. So, I thought we would move on into the next story, which is known as Going Viking. You know, not too long ago, Halfdan got himself a new longboat, and he was so happy about this new longboat, he decided he wanted to go a Viking. Now, the only problem is, though, that his boat's got about 30 oars to a side there, and that's more able-bodied men if he got to man all the oars. So we had to go up to the big town, up to Viborg there, and of course, Norseman being, but Norseman is, all we had to do was get in the middle of town and yell, Hey, who wants to go Viking? And we get a whole chorus of, yeah, sure, you betcha. The next thing you know, we not only have enough men for his boat, we got 2 more boats going. Now, we did have to go back to Skognier first to pick up the berserkers. Believe me, you don't want to get back and have to deal with them when they found out they weren't invited to the party. So we ended up with 3 of them on our boat. We had Bjarke Axecatcher, Bjorn Saxonbane, and Hakon the Lame. Now, if you've ever been a Viking before, you know it takes a little while to get across the North Sea over there to England. And we get on the boat and we get to sail up and we're going right along there, but then the wind dies down, so we have to break out the oars and start to row. So we take Wiglaf, we give him a drum, we put him in the back of the boat to help us keep time. Boom, straw, boom, straw, boom, straw, and off we go. The problem is, by now, the berserks are bored. Hakon manages to convince Bjarke to have an axe-catching contest on a longboat in the middle of the North Sea. Naturally, it wasn't Hakon, it was Bjarke and Bjorn, but at any rate, one of them gets up in the front of the boat, the other one gets in the back of the boat, and they start throwing the axe back and forth. Well, at this time, we don't need the drum anymore. It's pretty easy. Stroke, duck, stroke, duck, stroke, duck, stroke, duck. And we're yelling and screaming at 2 of them that knock it off. But, you know, they're having so much fun, they ain't paying any attention to us. But then, you know, Bjarke starts to get just a little bit upset, because he is the champion axe catcher of the whole village there. Bjorn wasn't missing none of these. So he picked up another axe and started throwing it. Oh boy, he took off like a shot. Stroke, duck, stroke, duck, stroke, duck, stroke, duck. We go right between the other 2 boats. Got to stick their oars up in the air so we don't cut them off. And we're yelling and screaming to them to knock it off. And they're going, hey, look what's going on over there. And finally, Bjorn misses his hold on the axe. It turns sideways, hits him in the head, knocks him out. We just kind of let the oars dangle in the water there for a little while. The other 2 boats catch up to us, and we lock the axes in the sea chest for the rest of the trip. So then we go back to rowing. Boom, straw, boom, straw, boom, straw. Now the problem is, as I mentioned, we do have a 3rd berserker on board. And he was just as bored as Bjarke and Bjorn. But after he saw what happened to Bjorn, he wasn't going to play axe catching with Bjarke here. But he decided since we had the oars out anyway, he was going to go oar dancing. Hakon the Lame. So nothing in which we could say could change his mind. I mean, after all, somebody 300 pounds and 6'6" with a battle axe decides he's going oar dancing, he goes oar dancing. So he goes and he jumps out of the back of the boat, he lands on the oar dips into the water, his foot slides off, he slips and hits his head on the side of the boat and goes right into the water out cold. Just lucky for him that Halfdan saw what he was doing and tied a rope onto the back of his belt there. But the whole boat had to stop rowing just to haul him back in again. Although there were a few snickers about how good an anchor he made, and we just leave him on down there. But, now, we go ahead and we pull him up. We throw him over onto the side there, put a blanket on him, and went back to rowing. So thank the gods we finally managed to make it over there to England. But you know, we've been raiding them so often, there aren't a whole lot of Saxon villages left, so we kind of had to row up and down till we found one. And then we pulled up onto the beach, and by now the berserks are all bored again. So as we hit the sand, they ran right off the front of the boat into the water, up onto the beach, and there they go. You got the Bjarke Axecatcher out in front, you got Bjorn Saxonbane right behind him, and bringing up the rear was Hakon the Lame. And so we get off the boat, we get all of our armor together, we get all our bags and stuff ready for the goodies. We start getting up and marching up towards the village. We hear all the yelling and screaming and hacking and chopping and everything else going on. We finally managed to get up there, and by then the Saxons are all dead or gone. Everything's pretty much settled and done, and that was the point that Hakon finally got there from his full charge from the beach. Frothing at the mouth, chewing on his axe, and looking at the rest of us. So we decided we better give him something to do. So we had him help us round up the livestock. He wasn't too good at it, yelling and screaming and hacking and chopping like that, but at least he wasn't yelling and screaming and hacking and chopping at us. He also wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to where he was going neither, and ran right into the pig swallow. Oh man, right up into here with all that stinky stuff. And when he came up out of there, you know what? Berserkers aren't too particular about how they smell. Although in Skognier, we've got the cleanest berserkers in all of Scandinavia. Woohoo! They take 2 and 3 baths a year whether they need it or not. But even they were turning up their nose at Hakon. So we had to give him a bath. And let me tell you, you ain't seen nothing more pitiful than a grown berserker cry when you take his axe away. Because that's the only way you're going to get him in the bath. So we dumped him in the ocean, we scrubbed him down, and then we did it again, and then we did it again, and then we did it again. We had to give him a bath every day for a whole week before we could get him back on the boat.
Oh,
Of course, by then, the berserkers were all calling him Hack on the Lilac. We did have a few less berserkers on the way home, though. But I'll tell you what, that's the last time I go for a Viking on Half Dan's new boat. Yeah, sure, you betcha. Yeah, them poor Saxons, they pretty much bear the brunt of most of our aggression. Unfortunately, every now and again, we have to give them a break so they got time to breed up and restock. But you know, we've just talked about Half Dan and his new longboat, and there's a lot of people that have been asking me just how come he had to get a new longboat. So I went back and I found out exactly why. You know, I hooked up with my good buddy Sven, and I was asking him what was going on with Hack-On's, excuse me, you're going to have to start that one over. Edit. It has been quite a while since I had been back to Skognir, and I'd heard about Half Dan's new longboat, so I decided to hook up with Sven, find out what had been going on. And we decided we were going to go down and hang out down by the fjord. Oh boy, I'm really off on this one. I apologize sincerely. Let's try that one more time. Not too long ago, Half Dan got himself a new longboat, and a lot of people have been asking me why, because after all, he had a pretty nice longboat to start with. So I went back, hooked up with Sven, and he told me the story. See, it wasn't too long after they had built the new Berserker longhouse, and although Half Dan, he ain't a Berserker, he ain't all that far off neither, he liked to go up there to party with them. And the last time he went up there, he had such a good time that when he left, he forgot to put the bar back across the outside of the door.
uh-oh.
Yeah. He didn't make it all the way home neither, you know. He'd had so much to drink that he only got about halfway there, and he passed out in the street. Right about then, the Berserkers realized that they weren't locked in, and they got loose, and they ran all over town. But then they finally managed to spot Half Dan laying down there in the street, and they rolled him over. Now, the thing was, though, that when Half Dan had fell down, he had fell down on his face and broke his nose, and blood had spurted out all over his beard there. And when they saw that, they figured he must be dead, so they had to give him a Viking funeral. So they picked him up and they carried him down to the fjord and they put him on his boat. They piled up a whole bunch of it around him and soaked it down with oil. And then they ran into their first problem, see, because no matter how much they tried, they couldn't get none of the ladies in Skognir to go on the boat to go with him up to Valhalla. They kept on trying until finally Bjarke's wife Hilda came out with her battle axe, and well, they gave up on that idea. So they put a sheep on there instead. I guess they figured a girl's a girl. Now, there were two problems with that. Yes, only two problems with that. Sven pointed out to them, first of all, that, you know, Half Dan, he weren't no Norman, and so putting a sheep on there really wasn't appropriate. And even if it had been appropriate, it wouldn't have done no good because it was a boy sheep and not a girl sheep. But they really didn't care, you know. They went ahead and they put the sheep on there, put the dog down by his feet, and then they shoved the boat out into the fjord. And that was when somebody pointed out to them that they forgot to light the thing on fire. So Hakon went back, got a bunch of torches, and him and Bjarke and Bjorn all took turns throwing torches out till they finally managed to land one on the boat, and it caught fire. Right about then, the dog decided it had enough. It didn't mind being on the boat, but nobody said nothing about no fire. So it jumps over the side and swims back to shore. The sheep, on the other hand, didn't jump off, but it started baaing, and baaing, and baaing, and baaing, until finally all that baaing managed to wake up Half Dan. Now at first, he's trying to figure out how some silly sheep got out of its pen and got into his long haul. Then he smelled smoke. He figured, okay, maybe I didn't make it all the way home. You know, maybe I passed out down there by the blacksmith shop, and that's not too far from the sheep's pens. And then finally he noticed that he wasn't just smelling smoke, but his feet were getting awfully warm. So he opened up his eyes and he looked and he saw that his feet weren't just warm, his feet were on fire. So now he's jumping up and down, screaming and shouting and stomping. The sheep decided it had enough and it jumped over the side. And that was the point that Half Dan realized that he wasn't in his long haul, but he was on his boat, and his boat was on fire. So now he's yelling and screaming and shouting, splashing water over the side. The berserkers are all laughing, shouting and pointing. Look, he's going to Valhalla! He's going to Valhalla! Where's the Valkyries? Where's the Valkyries? And that was the point Half Dan realized that he wasn't going to be able to put out that fire, and he jumped over the side. And everybody else thought it'd be a good idea to go back up into town, because nobody wanted to be there when he came up out of the Valkyr. And he did. He was cold, he was wet, and his hair and his beard were smoking. They didn't have a whole lot of trouble getting the berserkers back in the longhouse that night. But I'll tell you what, the next time you want to go up there and party with the berserks, you better make sure when you leave, you put that bar back across the outside of the door. Yeah, sure, you bet. Thank you. You know, the burning ship is the iconic Viking funeral, all right? But it actually was not the more common one. Ship burials were, but just not burning ones. Usually they actually would pull the ship up onto land, like the Osberg ship and like the Gokstad ship, and they would pile all your goodies on you because being Norse, you get to take it with you. And then they would build a big mound over it. Now, if you were somebody that couldn't afford a ship like that, you can still go to Scandinavia, and there are all sorts of graveyards where what they do is they bury you in the ground, and then they build a stone ring in the shape of a boat around the grave. And this is still to convey the idea that you are on a ship heading up into the afterlife. One of the more famous ship burials, which again did not involve burning, actually is in the Beowulf saga, and it's about how the Skilding dynasty, which was the royal family of Denmark, got started. And in that particular one, if you've read the saga, they found a ship floating free with no crew, but with a baby on it, and it was piled up with armor and weapons and gold and silver and other trade goods. And when they rescued the infant, he grew up to be a great hero, became king of the Danes, and then when he died, they reversed the process. They put him back on a boat, they loaded it up with all those things, and they pushed it off into the ocean again just to let it drift. So the burning side of it, while it evokes great images, was actually not the more common way of doing a boat burial. Okay, so let's move on here. We've already talked about berserks. Everybody here pretty much knows who and what they are. But you know something? Just recently I discovered they may not be as dumb as everybody thinks they are.
Really?
So, the name of this story is Berserks Are Not Stupid. You know, there's an awful lot of people that like to make fun of berserks, tell jokes about how dumb they are. And I have to admit that I have done my fair share. But recently I have come to the realization that berserks are not stupid. You see, berserks are just simple. They have learned as a group that there isn't a problem in the world, with the exception of women, that cannot be resolved by the application of one of the 4 solutions. And the 4 solutions in no particular order are: eat it, drink it, burn it, kill it. Now I know there's going to be some smarty pants that says, Torvald, you're missing one of the solutions. First of all, I would like to point out I did say with the exception of women. Because as everybody knows, there is no solution to the problem of women. Also, there are youngsters within earshot of this story, and therefore that solution is not appropriate at this time. Now, what brought me to the realization, though, is that me and the boys were out to Viking, and we were just finishing up in this Saxon village. Sven and I are standing out in front of the church, looking up at the steeple, wondering how in the heck we're going to get the bell down. Hakon came walking by, took one disgusted look at us, and threw a torch in through the front door. An hour later, that bell came crashing right on down to the ground. Here we was thinking it was a big, complicated problem, but heck, take one of the 4 solutions, burn it, no more problem. Even if it did take a couple of hours before we could move it anywhere. But the true beauty of the 4 solutions is that no matter how complicated your problem gets, you can actually use more than one solution on the same problem. And I have an example of that. Not too long ago, Sven's prize bull managed to get out of its pen, smashed into Ole's kitchen garden, busted through the fence, ate up a bunch of the vegetables, trampled all over everything it didn't eat. Finally, Ole managed to get a rope around its neck and tied it up next to his long haul and said that since it had caused so much damage, it belonged to him now. Sven said, now, hey, wait a minute, that ain't right, and the 2 of them got to arguing about it. And they got louder and louder and louder until finally Bjarki had just had enough, and there goes his battle axe. The next thing you know, his wife Hilda came out with her butcher knives, and we cut up that bull, we cooked it, and we ate it. See, you take 3 of the 4 solutions, kill it, burn it, eat it, no more problem.
There you go.
So the next time you want to make fun of the berserks, tell jokes about how dumb they are, I would suggest you remember my little story before one of them introduces you to one or more of the 4 solutions. Yeah, sure, you bet. Let's see, I think for the next story, though, I am going to answer an age-old question. It is one that has plagued scholars for centuries. Why do we go Viking? I mean, they talk about population pressures. They talk about economic pressures. They talk about religious pressures. Well, I'm here to tell you that the solution isn't all that complicated. They're overthinking it. Right? You know, it's been quite a while since I had been back to my visit my old home that had just got here. So decided to go back, hook up with Sven, catch up on all the doings. And we headed on down to the theater to relax for a little while, and on the way down there we picked up a couple of fishing poles, so it looked like he was doing something. As a fella that isn't doing something, it's a challenge to every woman alive to find something for him to do. So we got our fishing poles, we headed on down to the theater, kicked back to relax, tossed the lines out there, and you know, we weren't really all that serious about it. Kind of forgot to put any bait on. Then again, we didn't have any hooks or sinkers neither, but at least with the line dangling in the water, it looked like we was doing something. So I looked over at Sven and said, you know, Sven, I've been thinking. You been what? I've been thinking. What the heck do we go Viking for? I mean, we get on a boat with 30 other guys for weeks and weeks at a time. We get cold, we get wet, we get blisters on our hands and hiney. We have a little bit of fun on the other end, and then we get back on that boat with those 30 other guys for weeks and weeks at a time. Get cold, get wet, get blisters on our hands and hiney, and go home. What the heck are we going Viking for? He says, you know, I never really thought about it like that. What the heck do we go Viking for? You know, it ain't as much fun as it used to be over there in England now, because now they got these fellas called knights. And they're just as tough to fight as the berserkers are. And if you're going to fight berserks, you might as well just stay home. What the heck are we going Viking for? And I said, yeah, you know what, it ain't as profitable as it used to be over there either, because people were raiding them so often, there really aren't all that many Saxon villages left. Kind of because we have this habit of burning them down when we're done. What the heck are we going Viking for? And he looks at me and he says, yeah, you know, it ain't as much fun going the other direction either, because if you go east, the only place to go is Novgorod. And if you're going to go to Novgorod, you might as well go the whole way and go all the way down to Byzantium. And if you think you're going to get blisters on your hands and hiney from rowing that boat, well, you got to pull it over land for a couple of days to go from river to river. So what the heck are we going Viking for? And I said, yeah, you know, it ain't as much fun down there in Byzantium as it used to be either, because now they got this group called the Varangian Guard. And they are berserks. And like I said before, if you're going to fight berserks, you might as well just stay home. So what the heck are we going Viking for? Well, right about then, Sven's wife Trudy comes out and she says, Sven, Torvald, get up here and start splitting the wood. It ain't going to split itself, you know. And we got to get started on the lutefisk, or we're not going to have enough to get us through the winter. And somebody forgot to put the bar back across the door to Berserker Loghouse, and they've gotten loose and they're running all over town, and you got to go round them up. Well, I looked over at Sven and said, how long do you think it's going to take us to round everybody up? He says, I don't know, but it sure is time to go Viking. Yeah, sure, you bet. I wish I could say it was more complicated, man. It's all about getting away from the chores. So we did just talk about the Varangians. How many people here know who and what the Varangians are? A few of you. Okay, well, let me explain for those of you that don't. Basically, down in Byzantium, the Byzantines were having a little bit of a problem with the Norse kingdom of Kiev. All right? This is actually a Viking kingdom. The Rus were basically Norse from Sweden who had gone down in there, conquered the area, and then started intermarrying, but they really didn't change much of who and what they were, and so they got down and they were raiding into Byzantium. And the Byzantines learned pretty quickly on, they just were not a match for the Norsemen on a one-on-one basis. And they couldn't catch them either because just, you know, people don't realize just how fast and nimble the Norse longboat is. One of the reasons that they surprised everybody is that a Norse longboat only needs 3 feet of water to float. That meant that they could go up rivers that most people thought were unnavigable by regular ships. So all of a sudden, the Norse, who were normally on the coast, 20, 30 miles inland, and then they could get right back on that boat and go right back out as fast as they came in. So finally, the Byzantines, being good civilized people that they are, realized that if you can't beat them, buy them. And the Norse are all too willing to be bought, essentially. I mean, pay, you know, you've heard of the term Danegeld? Okay, it's basically, it means Dane price. Essentially, it's extortion. Pay us to go away. Okay, well, they started doing that at first, but then they hit on a better idea. Let's just hire them. And so the Byzantine emperor hired a large number of these Norse warriors to be part of his personal bodyguard. They also formed a unit in the Byzantine army and were quite famous. As a matter of fact, King Harold Hardrada was a captain of the Varangians before he went home to become king of Norway. So at any rate, I thought that now that I've given you a little history lesson about the Varangians, I would tell you the real story of how they got started.
Dun, dun, dun.
You know, it's been pretty quiet in my old home village of Skog here ever since they built the new Berserker Longhouse. It used to be quite exciting. I mean, you could walk right out the front door of your long hall into the middle of an axe catching contest, whether you wanted to play or not. And everybody knows that the Yarky, he's the champion axe catcher of the whole village. But a lot of people don't know why. You see, Norseman being, but Norseman is, the Yarky liked to go a Viking. The only problem was he wouldn't tell his wife Hildy when he was going and when he was coming back. So he'd walk in through the front door of his hall, Hildy, I'm home, and whoosh, there goes the axe. Now, you know, berserks aren't known for being all that smart. He was smart enough to know not to throw it back. He wasn't really so much about whether she could catch it or not. He just didn't want to give her any more ammo to throw at him. So anyway, like I say, things have been pretty boring lately, so we decided we wanted to go a Viking. So we all went down and piled into Halfdan's longboat, and you know, we decided we didn't want to go over to England that year. You know, we've been raiding them so often and burning everything down, there just wasn't all that many goodies to collect over there. So we figured we'd give them a break for a year or two, let them breed up, restock, maybe they'd be worth raiding then. So we decided we was going to go east instead. So we headed on east, and we got over there to Novgorod, and boy, we was having a really good time over there until some of the berserks got bored and started teaching them locals how to play axe catching. We had to leave town pretty quick after that. Although we did pick up one new crewman, called him Oli. But after he played axe catching with the Yarky, he only had one ear. Yeah, made his hat sit kind of funny. But you know, we decided we still didn't want to go home. We were still pretty bored, so we thought we'd go on down to Byzantium. Well, you know, you can't just go straight on down to Byzantium. You know, you got to kind of portage from river to river to get over for the big one to get you down there. And if you ain't never portaged no longboat, that's an adventure all on its own. See, the first thing you got to do is you pull your ship up onto the beach. Then you cut down some trees to make some logs. Then you roll the logs up under the front of the boat. Then you tie a rope under the front of the boat and you pull it up on top of the logs. Now you got some guys in the front pulling on the rope, and you got some guys in the back pushing on the back, and as the log rolls out the back, you run it around at the front. Yeah. So we get the boat up onto the logs, and we're all pulling on the rope in the front. We got the berserks pushing on the boat in the back, but you know that rope was awful slick, so we all let go to spit in our hands to get a better grip on it, and well, the berserks got an extra bath that year. Lucky for us, we'd already locked up their axes in the sea chest, so they couldn't do much more than yell at us at that point. Well, we did finally manage to make it over there to Byzantium. But you know what? Them Byzantines got no sense of humor. I mean, you pillage one village, you burn one church, and this thing you know, you got the whole bloody army chasing you around down there. We let them around for a little while, every now and again slowing down so they could catch up to us and let the berserks work off their nerves. And then they finally got us cornered. Had us up on top of this hill, surrounded on every side, 5,000 of them, 200 of us. We had them right where we wanted them. We just turned the berserks loose and had a party for a little while. Do you know that Byzantine emperor, he ain't got no more sense of humor than the rest of them does. He finally pulled everybody back, came out waving this big white flag. And we're trying to figure out just what he's doing, but we figured we'd go out there and at least talk to him first. We get out there and he says, boys, you know, you're really impressive. How'd you like to come work for me and be my personal bodyguard? We said, well, you know, sounds pretty good, but what's the pay? He says, hey, you come work for me, I'll give you all the beer you can drink, I'll give you all the food you can eat, I'll give you gold, I'll give you women. Whoa, okay, that sounds pretty good, but, you know, what if we just don't want to take it? He says, well, I can't afford to lose any more troops to you, so I'll just have to pull everybody back and shoot you full of arrows. Okay, we had to stop and think about that for a minute. Well, he finally said, boys, I've got to have an answer. Oh, well, we drew up rank upon rank, shield upon shield. We raised our axes, we raised our spears. We looked him right in the eye and said, yeah, sure, you betcha. Now, you know, the interesting thing about doing these stories over the years is what it is that inspires them. And sometimes the story behind the story is just as much fun as the original story. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit here, and I'm going to give you the story behind the story of the Berserk's Four Solutions. Now, this had happened not too long after I had moved back east here from the West Coast, and I had gone to, I think it was my second Tenzing. I don't like to count my first Pennsic as my first Pennsic because that was the Pennsic that it rained every other day, and we had, basically sledding through the camp. So it wasn't a whole lot of fun. But as I had mentioned to some of you before the show started, most of my stories had already made it back here on CDs, so folks had already heard them. And they also knew me as the Leather Armorer from the work that I do. It had passed around being able to order it online. And I spent most of that entire war going, yes, I am that Torvald. For those that didn't know, it was the same person. And so finally, I think it was about the end of the first week, Saturday or Sunday, some people came by my tables, and they said, "You're Torvald." And I went, yes. They said, "Torvald Torgerson." Yes. And I'm waiting to hear the, "Oh, you're that Torvald," that I had been hearing this entire war at this point. And they looked at me and they said, "Oh, we love your stories. You are the reason we became a Viking household. Our entire row here at Pennsic is all Viking, and it's all because of you." And of course, my ego's went like this throughout all that. And they said, "You have got to come up to our feast tomorrow night because we want to honor you as one of our guests of honor. We're going to have the king of this there, the king of that there, all these people here. Everybody wants to meet you." And I'm like, "Okay, yeah, this sounds really, really cool. I'm gonna have a blast." And I did. I got up there, and there was over 150 people there. They had tables all lined up around. It was a humongous feast. They had a big bonfire in the center. And at the end of the feast, I'm getting up to tell some stories to thank them for their hospitality. And they said, wait. Before you actually do anything, we have something we want you to see. And so they bring out this 3-foot by 3-foot scale model of a Saxon village. Got little thatched roof huts, and there's a little pen over here with a bunch of sheep in it. There's a church with a steeple and a bell on the top. And they set this down next to the bonfire. And then they bring out a bunch of little wooden matches like torches, and they light everything on fire. They light the sheep on fire, they light the buildings on fire, they light the church on fire, and I'm just standing here watching it all burn. And as I'm watching, the little steeple on the church goes, and the first thing that popped into my head was, yeah, me and Sven were standing out in front of the church looking up at the steeple, wondering how in the heck we're going to get the bell down. And that's where that story came from. It's much like this next little short story for you. And it came about from a conversation at an event just like this, and we were talking about Game Guild, and I thought to myself, what would it be like your first time being paid off and not really knowing what's going on? Not too long ago, me and the boys were coming back from going a Viking, and we had been so successful, our ship was just loaded up with goodies. As a matter of fact, we had so many goodies, we thought we'd stop along the way and do a little bit of trading on the way home, and maybe get rid of some of the bulkier things and get it down into smaller things that are easier to carry, some silver or some salt or something such like that. And we're rolling along right along the coast of Ireland there, and we finally managed to spot a village. So we wanted to make a good impression, right? So we shined up all of our armor, we shined and sharpened all of our weapons, we put the Yarkie up in the front of the boat with all of his gear with a big torch in his hand lit so they could see it, him blowing on the horn. And sure enough, as we're pulling up onto the sand, we see a whole horde of people come running down out of the village. And they get right down to the beach, and then things got really weird. Because as soon as we hit the beach, they started throwing these little pouches and little sacks and stuff into the boat. We weren't really sure what they were doing at first, and then finally Sven grabbed up one of them and looked in it, and it was full of money. Boy, we ran around like a bunch of Normans chasing sheep at that point, grabbing up all those little pouches and boxes and stuff. We figured we must have hit the mother lode. These people were so desperate to trade with us, they were throwing things at us before they even knew what we brought to trade. And if you don't believe it, things got even weirder after that. Because as soon as they had thrown all that money into the boat, half of them turned around and ran right back up into the village. The ones that were left, most of them dropped down there in the sand on their knees, and they're praying and wailing and carrying on and making all sorts of noise. And the rest of them that weren't doing that got up in front to the boat and shoved us right back out into the water. That seems an awful silly way to do business to me. We got all their money and they didn't get nothing back from us. But I'll tell you what, if they're going to throw money in the boat every time I go by, I'm going to have to come visit more often. Yeah. Thank you. Let's see, I better keep a little bit of eye on the time here, because we do have a competition apparently coming up after my show. So, but I still have some time here, so I thought these have all been original stories at this point, so now we're going to jump into some of the myths. And I thought I would tell you the story about Freya's wedding. You know, things were pretty nervous up in Asgard the other day. Thor was a ranting and a raging, a rooting and a hollering. He was kicking over boxes, ripping doors off their hinges, and nobody was really paying a lot of attention at first. Because, you know, Thor, he's a pretty excitable fella, does this kind of thing all the time here. But when he didn't settle down, everybody finally got out there and asked him what was going on. He said, well, I've lost my hammer. Of course, some smarty pants had to speak up and say, well, where was the last place you had it? Well, if I could remember the last place I had it, I wouldn't be looking for it now, would I? Everybody had a good laugh. All until finally Odin spoke up and said, you know, not too much longer, we're going to have this big party called Ragnarok, and it ain't going to be nearly as much fun if Thor don't have his hammer. So they got together and they helped him look for it. They turned Asgard upside down and they gave it a good shake. And nothing. And Thor was mighty disappointed. I mean, after all, that always works with the couch. But anyway, they were about to give up when they noticed this big bird flying around overhead. And they were going to run and duck for cover, and it let out this big squawk, and he goes, oh, you're looking for Thor's hammer, huh? Well, I know where it is. Thrym, the king of the frost giants, has it. Said he won't give it back unless Freya agrees to become his wife. Well, Thor looks over at Freya and says, well, we'll get your wedding dress. Let's get it going. I got to get my hammer back. She looks him right in the eye and said, yeah, well, maybe you better just get another hammer. Now, I will give them credit. They did try. They brought a bunch of hammers for him. And he picked up the first one. He looked at it and said, craftsman on it. Nope, too small. Picked up the next one and looked at it and said Stanley on it. Never heard of him. Picked up the next one and looked at it and said Taiwan. Nope, too cheap. Picked up the next one and looked at it and said Pentagon. Nope, too expensive. Picked up the last one and looked at it and said Dead Blow. You know, that's not too bad, but nah, it's just not as good as my old one. He tossed it back over his shoulder, and it just so happened when he did that, Balder was walking by, and it ricocheted off of him and landed over on Odin's foot, who was not impressed. So finally he looks over at Loki and he says, well, you're supposed to be the crafty one. How about you figure out how we're going to get Thor's hammer back? Well, Loki looks over at Thor. He looks over at Freya. He looks back over at Thor. He looks back over at Freya, and he gets this big smile on his face, and he said, you know, why don't we just give him what he wants? Freya was not happy with that answer. She was about to whop him right upside the head there, and he goes, no, that's not quite what I mean, see? I figure we'll just take one of your dresses, put it on Thor, and let him go get his hammer back. Everybody had a good laugh. All except Thor, of course, and it was just lucky for Loki that Tyr and Balder were standing by and got a hold of one of his arms on either side and held him back. But you know, Loki, he just never could pass up a chance to tease Thor. So he just standing in front of him there, wiggling his ears and his nose at him and snickering away. Finally, Odin got this big smile on his face and he said, you know, that's not such a bad idea, and since it's yours, you get to go with him. Now, this didn't bother Loki a whole lot, you know, being a shape changer and all. He just went on back to his hall, got into a dress, and changed himself into a woman. Pretty good-looking woman. Matter of fact, on his way back to where everybody else was, there were 3 cat calls, 2 wolf whistles, and a marriage proposal. At least until they found out who it was they were looking at. But then they ran into their first real problem, see. Because they brought out a bunch of Freya's dresses, and none of them were going to fit on Thor. I mean, after all, you can only let the seams out so far before there just ain't no seams left. So they had to make a whole new dress. Took 3 bolts of cloth, but they finally got him covered, more or less, because that's when they ran into their next big problem. No matter how much anybody scratched their head or racked their brains, they couldn't come up with a good enough excuse to explain to the frost giants just how come Freya had a big red beard. So they brought out a razor. And they passed it around and around and around and around, and they finally all just stopped and looked over at Tyr, who was the bravest of the gods, and he looked back at him and said, you know, I've only got one good hand left, and I intend to keep it. So they gave up on that idea. But then Loki said, you know, down there on Midgard, when a woman's getting married, they usually put a veil over his head. So that's what they did. Took another whole bolt of cloth, but they finally got him covered head to toe. Then they took Freya's cloak of feathers, put it on his shoulders, hung her necklace on him, took her belt of gold, put it around his waist, and hung some keys off of it. And then him and Loki got up into his chariot, and off they went to yacht time. Now, to say that the king of the frost giants were overjoyed was something of an understatement, because he never expected them to give him Freya for his bride. And truth be told, having Thor's hammer is pretty poor compensation for not having the goddess of love and beauty in your bed. So he was a really happy fellow when they showed up and said, well, let's get up in here to the hall and get the wedding feast started. So you have the king of the frost giants up at the top of the table. Sitting next to him is Freya, Thor. Sitting next to him is Loki, the handmaiden. The frost giants, on the other hand, were just a little amazed at how much food and drink disappeared under the veil of the dainty bride of the frost giant king. 1 side of beef, 2 roast pigs, and 3 barrels of meat disappeared underneath that veil. But you know, Loki, he's a really smooth fella. He just looked up there and said, you know, ever since she heard she was going to become your bride, Freya's been so excited she hasn't been able to eat or drink for 7 days and 7 nights. So it's not all that surprising that she'd be hungry and thirsty. Well, that frost giant just puffed up with pride to hear that she was that excited to be his bride. He figured he'd bend on down there and give her a big kiss on the cheek. He got a hold of that veil and got one good look into those bloodshot blue eyes staring back at him. Yup, and you ain't never seen such bloodshot angry eyes. But you know, Loki, he's a really smooth fella. He just looked up there and said, well, you know, ever since she heard she was going to become your bride, Freya's been so excited she hasn't been able to sleep for 7 days and 7 nights. So it's not all that surprising. Her eyes would be really red. And if that frost giant could have puffed up anymore, he'd have exploded all over that hall there. And he figured if she's that excited, he ain't keeping her waiting no more. Yeah, sure, let's get the priest out here and get the wedding started. Loki looked up at him and said, well, you're going to have to bring out Thor's hammer because you'll say your vows on the hammer and we'll send it back to Asgard to seal the deal. Well, bring out the hammer. A few minutes later, 3 big burly frost giants, just a heaving and a straining, a huffing and a puffing, come carrying that hammer up, and they lifted it up and laid it on the end of the table, and Thor had had enough. He grabbed a hold of that hammer, started whipping it around. He ripped that veil off of his head. Have you ever seen what happens when you scare a cat? Let me tell you, frost giants are just as capable of going 9 different directions all at the same time without ever leaving the spot they're standing on. Not that it did them any good. Not a whole lot of frost giants made it out of the hole that night. And anytime anybody else gets the bright idea about wanting to steal Thor's hammer, well, they just tell them the story about Freya's wedding, and they give up on that idea right quick. Yeah, sure, you betcha. Well, I think we've got time for basically just one more, and I'm trying to think which one maybe that I haven't covered so far. Anybody have a request for a story that they know of that I haven't used so far? No?
They're all good.
Well, then how about this instead? How about we end it with a song? I think that'll be a good one.
Yes,
We're in Viking season. I think it's only fair that we end it with a good old-fashioned Viking carol.
Yes.
Now, as in any culture, some people have this tendency to steal songs from other cultures, and so you're probably going to recognize the melody here. But realize, of course, that I am singing the original, traditional Viking carol, okay? Regardless of what you may have heard before. God save us from the Vikings, do not let them look this way. We still have not rebuilt what they destroyed way back in May. And if they come again, then we will all just run away. Oh, tidings of misery and woe, misery, woe. Oh, tidings of misery and woe. They burned the village to the ground, not one building survived. They sacked the church most thoroughly and left no priests alive. We buried what was left of them while everybody cried. Oh, tidings of misery and woe, misery, woe. Oh, tidings of misery and woe. So now we watch for Viking ships that come from o'er the sea, and pray each night most fervently that they will let us be. For if they come again, then we are all just history. Oh, tidings of misery and woe, misery, woe. Oh, tidings of misery and woe.
Huzzah.
Even with my little bit of flubs here and there. If you didn't already know or hadn't quite caught on, these stories are recorded. I do have a few CDs with me if you'd like to buy one now that we're done. And they are also kept in stock and sold by the Village right here on site. Thank you very much.
I like his sound system. That's pretty cool.
You really, if you can, get one of the CDs.
All right.
It is the most fun stuff down for you.
Oh, okay, thank you. Separate yours from mine.
Gotcha.
Oh, the gravy. All the three bottles. CDs are good because that's the one that got kicked from. The new ones have the Zerkers for Solutions. But,
Matter of fact, let me turn off my camera. Because I was recording it as well.
Okay.